Welcome to the show that puts you in front of all things people, power, and politics. This is The Pulse. I'm Taryn Asher. It's high-stakes season at the Supreme Court with major rulings coming fast. And in Michigan, gun control bills clear the Senate, but now face tough odds in a Republican-controlled House. And Congress has been hard at work in the nation's capital, battling the budget bill, but also dealing with the fallout of the U.S. airstrikes against Iran without congressional approval. What have they seen since with those intelligence reports? Have they come out yet? Congresswoman Debbie Dingell and conservative commentator Jamie Rowe will take on these topics. And we're also talking with Oakland University political science professor Dave Dulio about the potential fallout and what many people may not realize could prevent the budget bill from passing, at least on time. And tonight we begin, though, with the conflict in Iran, and the Pentagon is now on the offensive. They're doubling down on claims that the American airstrike on Iran destroyed the nuclear program. And they're going after journalists reporting on the intelligence report that says it was only set back a few months. We're hearing from Iran's supreme leader for the first time since the U.S. airstrike and Iran's retaliation. On Iranian state television, he claimed the retaliation was a, quote, slap to America's face. He downplayed the U.S. airstrikes and said President Trump exaggerated their impact. And as the Trump administration investigates who sent the early intelligence briefing to the media, Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth accused the media of searching for scandals and missing historic moments.
In your DNA and in your blood to cheer against Trump, because you want him not to be successful so bad, you have to cheer against the efficacy of these strikes. You have to hope maybe they weren't effective. Maybe the way the Trump administration has represented them isn't true. So let's take half-truths, spun information, leaked information, and then spin it. Spin it in every way we can to try to cause doubt and manipulate the public mind over whether or not our brave pilots were successful.
A University of Michigan nuclear engineering professor tells us it's still too early to know how effective the airstrikes were. Dr. Igor Yuganovich says that right now most assessments are based on satellite images, but he believes the human cost could have dealt a more serious blow.
Know that many nuclear scientists have been killed in this conflict. And as a result of that, I think there will be a significant setback, in my opinion, in the Iran nuclear program because of that loss of the human capital. In addition, I think what this can cause is a lot of apprehension about entering such a program in the future for other scientists.
If you want to watch more of that conversation with Professor Yovanovitch, just head to the Pulse section of the fox2detroit.com, or you can scan the QR code at the bottom of your right screen, and it will take you to last night's episode. Now to the nation's highest court, where ruling season is heating up. Several big decisions still to come, but today the Supreme Court handed down a major ruling on a hotly debated issue. The Supreme Court has ruled that states can block Planned Parenthood from receiving Medicaid funding, even for services like cancer screenings and birth control. The decision split along ideological lines. While Planned Parenthood is known as the nation's largest abortion provider, most Medicaid patients go there for other health care, and federal funds generally can't be used for abortions anyway. Pro-life groups are calling it a victory. Planned Parenthood says it will block access to care for thousands who rely on them.
It is a grave injustice, not just towards our patients who use Medicaid, but to all Americans who must live with the knowledge that if they fall on hard financial times, as many are right now, they are fundamentally less free.
If Planned Parenthood is defunded, nearly 200 Planned Parenthood health centers in 24 states across the country are at risk of closure.
Chief Justice John Roberts says the remainder of the opinions for this term will come out tomorrow. Perhaps the biggest battle is birthright citizenship. President Trump tried to restrict it with an executive order, but lower courts blocked it. The Supreme Court could try to scale back the nationwide court orders. Other decisions to be made, whether parents can remove their kids from lessons that use LGBTQ storybooks, and an effort by Texas to verify someone's age before they are allowed to watch pornography online. Well, the Planned Parenthood story, though, that's the one that has a lot of you talking. Ricky calls it the perfect analogy of being pro-birth but not pro-life, while Jerry says it's good taxpayer money might not go to the organization anymore. And then Tara says the organization helped her when she had no health insurance but dealt with some serious health issues. Kate claims states getting to decide is the right thing. If you want to weigh in, make sure you head to our Fox 2 Facebook page and make your voice heard. A lot is going on, always in the world of politics, so let's pick up the pace and run through some of the other big stories we're following right now. The Trump administration plans to deport Guillermo Albrego Garcia to a country that's not his native, El Salvador, once he's released from a Tennessee jail. And you'll remember he was mistakenly deported to El Salvador earlier this year, but the Trump administration also claimed he was a gang member. Albrego Garcia denies this. The Justice Department says the removal proceedings would be to a third country, but added there's no imminent plans to deport him. The government would follow all court orders. Well, the Social Security Administration commissioner is facing questions from lawmakers about not only the agency's future, but its ability to pay Americans their benefits and protect their privacy. This comes after months of job cuts and leadership changes there. 7,000 workers lost their jobs since the Trump administration took office. And the commissioner claims that he plans to invest in technology so the agency can run with fewer workers. Adding increased staffing isn't the long-term answer. And here in Michigan, bills that would ban bump stocks and ghost guns did pass the state Senate. They're now headed to the House, where they face an uncertain future since that chamber is Republican controlled. Bump stocks allow semi-automatic rifles to fire rapidly, almost like a machine gun. And then ghost guns are homemade firearms that don't have serial numbers. Supporters say the bans are needed for safety, while opponents claim they'll only punish responsible gun owners. Well, to the budget battle now in Washington, where the Senate parliamentarian delivers a big blow to Republicans. They say the Medicaid provider tax overhaul, which is a key part of the bill, violates Senate rules. Republicans are trying to finish the bill this week, and they were counting on cuts to Medicaid and other programs to offset President Trump's tax cuts. Some Republicans called for the parliamentarian to be fired, but leadership dismissed that idea. Democrats say they'll keep fighting as the White House says President Trump is ready to step in.
Always ready to whip if he has to. Hopefully he doesn't, and everyone just falls in line and gets this bill done.
We're going to do everything we can to force Republicans to face their constituencies with very important votes that will restore SNAP benefits, that will restore the Medicaid, and oppose the attempts that they're making to make Medicaid more difficult for people to access.
And we'll look more into the Senate parliamentarians' role in this whole process. That's coming up in about 15 minutes. But next, we're not only diving into the budget battle, but the U.S. airstrike on Iran. Did President Trump break the rules when he did that without congressional approval? Congresswoman Debbie Dingell thinks so, and we're debating that next. You're watching The Pulse on Fox 2. Back now on The Pulse, looking at all things people, power, and politics. In Washington, the battle over the budget isn't the only fight. Lawmakers are now grappling with the fallout from U.S. airstrikes on Iran, launched without congressional approval. Congresswoman Debbie Dingell joins us via Zoom, and then conservative strategist Jamie Rose here with us in studio to talk about all of this. And I do want to begin with you, Congresswoman. I have to ask, how did you personally find out about the bunker bombs, and what was your initial reaction? Did you have any advanced warning?
We had zero advance warning. I found out the way the rest of the country found out, and that's part of the problem. when there is a use of military force and you are looking at a potential engagement in a war, the president, according to the Constitution, is supposed to consult with the Congress. Now, should he talk to 535, 100 senators, 435? We still have not been briefed, and it is unacceptable that we have not been briefed a week later. But there's something called the Gang of Eight, which is the senior Republicans and Democrats on the Homeland Security, the Intelligence Committees, the Armed Services Committee, and the Democrats who got security clearance are known. They're conservative, quite frankly. Members of our caucus were not advised or spoken to until this date, have yet to be briefed. And that is not consultation with the Congress, and we don't have the facts. That's what we need, are the facts.
So let's be clear then. You have not seen any of the intelligence, even what was leaked to the media about how devastating these bombs may have been?
I have a lot of questions from what I read in the media like you all. Tomorrow morning we have a 9 o'clock briefing, but we've also heard that the president is saying that he's not going to share any classified information with the Congress, which is unacceptable. So we'll have to see what happens at 9 o'clock tomorrow morning.
Jamie, what do you think about that? I mean, doesn't the president have a job, a responsibility to consult Congress, at least before he does something, a war act such as this?
I'll just remind everybody that President Obama didn't brief the Congress before he struck Libya, before he struck Syria. He had no authority from the Congress to do either of those attacks. And I heard zero complaints from the Democrats after those attacks were launched. But
President Trump campaigned on peace, that he didn't want to get involved in a war. Yet here we are launching our strongest bombs.
President Trump also said that Iran cannot have a nuclear weapon, that Iran cannot have a nuclear weapon. And that was a promise made, promise kept, as far as I'm concerned. And he did the world and the region a great service by taking out Iran's nuclear program, how he did. All the reports, I mean, everyone's basing this outrage that the attack was a failure based on one low confidence report that was leaked, and it wasn't even leaked in its entirety, but just certain sections to create a narrative. And of course, that narrative that's created is against Trump.
But can't we say that, though, about President Trump, though, who said, hey, we got it all, and there's been no one there to inspect it? I mean, Debbie, Congresswoman Dingell, what are your thoughts about that? I mean, and the extent of the damage and the potential for them to be able to build another nuclear program?
First of all, I want to say several things. None of us want, well, there are probably some, but I agree with Jamie that Iran having nuclear capability is a danger to global peace, period. But having said that, we do not have the facts. We do not know whether all of it was destroyed. I suspect that it was not. I suspect that they knew that it was coming, that some of the uranium itself was moved. We need some facts here. I also want to remind you that there were some Democrats that complained when President Obama did that bombing. Republicans were very loud. But what we need to make sure is that there is a process. By the way, President Obama did tell the Gang of Eight, Jamie. And right now, it's a week later. I don't want to see us entangled in another endless war in the Mideast. I want to know the facts. And we've got a responsibility to know what they are. And we need to be working with the president for global peace in the Mideast, but more importantly than anything, protecting our national security at home. And the entire way that this has been handled has endangered this country in some ways, from terrorist act, from sleeper cells, as you've heard, the FBI, which is run by a Republican, Patel.
Congresswoman, what about the War Powers Resolution? Where does that stand? And could that help enforce this going forward and making sure that, I guess, there are guidelines before missiles are launched?
So there's the Republicans changed the rules of the House, so the Senate could have an immediate vote, but there's a countdown on how many days before the privileged resolution on the war powers can be considered by the House. There are now two resolutions because the first resolution may be subject to interpretation. So the ranking members of Armed Services, Foreign Affairs, and the Intelligence Committee offered a second one. I think everybody, quite frankly, is waiting to see the briefing tomorrow, because I want to tell you something about how I feel. There's a famous Republican senator from Michigan, Senator Vandenberg, who said that politics should stop at the ocean's edge, and he is right. We need to keep national security should never be politicized the way it's being politicized right now.
Do you want to comment on that real quickly, Jamie?
It is always politicized.
It is always
Anything
politicized.
that Donald Trump does is politicized.
Well,
and quite honestly, I believe General Kane this morning at the intense briefing that he gave at the Pentagon, where he explained this strike, I will take his word for it over some leaked report from God knows who, whose only purpose was to try and create a narrative that, of course, is anti-Trump.
Real quickly, let's try to touch on the budget battle right now, because that, while you're dealing with all of that, Congresswoman, that's still going on too in D.C. It's cutting a lot of safety net programs for people. Jamie, who's going to absorb all of those cuts that when people are really at a disadvantage?
Well, you want to know who's going to benefit from this are the taxpayers of America, like no tax on tips, no tax on Social Security, no tax on overtime, tax deductibility for cars that are built in the United States. And income tax rates being held steady as opposed to having a dramatic increase. That is who's going to benefit. Yeah, they're going to take out waste and fraud and abuse within several of the entitlement programs like Medicaid, and, you know,
but it might hurt us all down the road. I mean, right or no? I mean, this could help a lot of people up front, a lot of the cuts, tax cuts, but down the road, we could pay for this.
Economic growth is going to help every single American, and that is what this bill is designed to do.
Congresswoman, your thoughts on this, because you are right in the middle of it. How likely will it pass by July 4th, and what are your thoughts?
Well, who knows how likely it'll pass. It did not pass the bird bath, which most people don't know, but it's a parliament. The way this bill is considered is reconciliation. It's not subject to a Senate filibuster, but it also has to be strictly budget, not policy issues. So many of the issues on Medicaid, some of them are very complicated, like we are going to lose, rural hospitals are going to close under the current bill. And Jamie, I would like to give some of those taxes that you're talking about, but the major recipients of the tax cuts are billionaires and corporations who I think should be paying their fair share. And we've had numerous objective, nonpartisan groups talk about that the cuts in Medicaid are not waste and fraud. It is the largest cut in food assistance in the history of this country. I think every child in America should not go to school hungry and should be able to not go to school hungry. And I'll work with you on anything to get it right, but I don't think that some of the horrific things that are being done in this bill that are going to hurt working men and women, and there are families that have two-income families that are still living below the poverty line. We got to work together, but the way this is being shoved down people's throats and the people that are going to be hurt by it, and the human faces on these people that are going to be hurt. Mothers out of Macomb County, where you live, who have actually broken down crying in my arms. We need to work together, but the bill as it is now will hurt real people in our communities.
And we are going to actually look into that tomorrow and talk to some people and with the personal impact it could have. But in the meantime, I have to let you go. We appreciate your insight, both of you, Congresswoman Dingell and Jamie Rowe. Thank you so much for being here.
Great.
Busy times and constantly changing there in Washington, D.C. So we'll let you get back. Up next, we're talking about that budget battle with Oakland University political science professor Dave Dulio after the break. The role, he says, could be key in all of this, and it's something you might not be thinking of. The Pulse is back in 3 minutes. Well, to help us sort out all of this political news, we are bringing in Oakland University political science professor Dave Dulio. We talked with him about a number of issues, starting with the U.S. airstrike on Iran. And he said the constitutionality debate is fascinating, but it's nothing new.
As you know, the president is commander-in-chief. but only Congress declares war. We've had this battle, we've had this tension over, who controls sort of the war-making power for centuries, and this is just the latest example of it. I think Democrats have come out very, very strong in saying that, oh my gosh, the president needed to talk to us. The president should have consulted with Congress. We have the power. Okay, fair. However, this is nothing new. Presidents for decades have engaged in bombing campaigns decided simply out of the White House. So, it's something that deserves discussion on a broader level. But I think at this point, it's, one wonders if you can put the toothpaste back in the tube.
And he also touched on the birthright citizenship battle and told us what he's watching for when the Supreme Court issues its ruling.
It's going to be interesting to see just how broad the justices go in their ruling. In many cases recently, and I'm certainly no attorney, but it appears to me that they have taken care to rule very narrowly in some contentious cases, and I wonder if that will happen again this time around. It really is about interpretation. I happen to think that a more interesting element of that case has got to do with the power of district court judges and how far their rulings can go, whether or not they are simply limited to their geographic jurisdiction or, for instance, the Eastern District of Michigan, right, or the Western District of Michigan, or if in fact they can, as some of these judges have tried to do and have done actually, make them apply nationwide.
And you heard the Congresswoman mention this, the parliamentarian. Dulio explained how that person plays a key role in the budget process by deciding what violates Senate rules and what does not.
This is a reconciliation bill, and the important part about that is that it doesn't need 60 votes to overcome a filibuster. It simply can be voted on and adopted with 51 votes. But within that, according to the Byrd rule, named after former Senator Robert Byrd from West Virginia, it has to contain budget matters only, spending matters only. And the person who determines that is the Senate parliamentarian. And thus far, that individual has ruled that any number of elements that were in the House bill that passed the House are not eligible to be contained in the Senate version. Republicans could, if they wanted to, overrule the parliamentarian with a floor vote. I imagine they would have to do it on each one of those items. But thus far, Senate Majority Leader Thune has said he is not going to do that. I would imagine at some point we will see Trump and the White House start to pressure Thune to take up some of those rejected pieces and get them back in via majority vote by the caucus.
Well, if the bill passes without those elements, Dulio claims it will be difficult getting the bill back through the House. Well, that is the Pulse for tonight. Thank you, as always, for joining us. I'm Tara Nasher. See you tomorrow.